The rattling of chains echoed through the dusty auction square of Knight's Ferry, California, a sound that sent shivers down the spines of decent folk who hurried past with averted eyes. Amelia Osborne struggled against her shackles, the iron cutting into her wrists as the midday sun beat down mercilessly on her exposed shoulders. It was 1872, and the world had supposedly moved beyond such barbarism, but in this remote corner of Stanislaus County, old sins died hard. "Next up, gentlemen," the auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying across the crowd of weather-beaten faces. "A fine specimen. Young, strong, educated too, can read and write, which might serve some of you businessmen. Previous owner claims she's difficult, but nothing a firm hand won't cure." Amelia's throat burned with unspoken words. 3 weeks ago, she had been a schoolteacher in Boston, traveling west to take up a position in San Francisco. Now she stood on an auction block, her identity reduced to merchandise after a series of misfortunes that began with a stagecoach robbery and ended with corrupt officials declaring her a debtor to be sold into servitude to cover her expenses. The bidding started low, $10, $20. $30 from a man whose eyes made Amelia's skin crawl, $50 from another whose breath reeked of whiskey even from yards away. $75, called a voice from the back, and the crowd parted. The man who stepped forward stood in stark contrast to the rough miners and ranchers gathered around the auction block. Tall and broad-shouldered, his faded denim pants and simple cotton shirt couldn't disguise the quiet authority in his stance. A worn leather vest and dusty boots completed his attire, while a Stetson hat shaded eyes that missed nothing. "Daniel Jameson bids again," the auctioneer announced with a hint of wariness. "Any advance on $75 for the woman?" the man with the whiskey breath spat in the dirt. $100. Daniel Jameson tilted his head slightly, studying Amelia with an unreadable expression. $200. A murmur rippled through the crowd. That was more than fair market value for a domestic servant, even one with education. $200 going once, the auctioneer called, his gaze sweeping the assembled bidders. "Going twice." $250, countered a heavyset man with a cruel twist to his mouth. The owner of the local saloon, Amelia had learned, who was known to work his female servants into early graves. Daniel Jameson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. $300. The saloon owner hesitated, calculating the profit margins in his head before shaking his head and stepping back. "Sold to Mr. Jameson for $300, the auctioneer declared, banging his gavel with finality. Amelia felt no relief as she was roughly pulled from the platform and pushed toward her new owner. Trading one master for another offered little comfort, regardless of the price paid. Daniel Jameson approached the sheriff who held her chains. His voice when he spoke was quiet but carried an edge that brooked no argument. "Untie her, she's coming home with me now," the sheriff scowled. "Now, Jameson, you know the rules. She stays bound till you get her home. These debt servants are flighty." "I said untie her." Daniel's hand moved slightly toward the holster at his hip. "She's not a slave, and I won't treat her like one." Something in his tone made the sheriff reconsider. With reluctant movements, he produced a key and unlocked the iron cuffs around Amelia's wrists. "Your funeral," the sheriff muttered. "She runs, don't come crying to me." The moment the chains fell away, Amelia rubbed her raw wrists, fighting the urge to flee. Where would she go? In a strange town with no money and the law against her, running would only end in recapture or worse. Daniel Jameson studied her face, then removed his coat and placed it gently around her shoulders, covering the torn dress that left her too exposed to the prying eyes of the crowd. "My wagon's this way," he said quietly. "Can you walk?" Amelia nodded stiffly, her pride the only thing keeping her upright. "Yes." He led her through town, past the curious stares of townspeople and the openly hostile glares of those who had lost the bidding. Amelia walked beside him rather than behind, noting how he adjusted his stride to accommodate her smaller steps. A sturdy wagon waited at the end of the street, hitched to 2 chestnut horses that stomped impatiently in the dust. Daniel helped her climb onto the wooden bench, then rounded to the driver's side and took the reins. As they pulled away from Knight's Ferry, Amelia finally found her voice. Why did you buy me? Daniel Jameson kept his eyes on the road ahead. I didn't buy you, miss. I paid your debt. A semantic distinction that makes little difference to my situation. His lips quirked slightly at her vocabulary. Maybe not yet, but it will. They traveled in silence for nearly an hour, leaving the town behind and following a winding road that climbed gradually into rolling hills, covered with golden grass and scattered oak trees. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, painting the scene in amber hues that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Finally, Daniel spoke again. My ranch is just beyond that ridge. It's not much, but it's peaceful. Amelia clutched his coat tighter around her shoulders. What will be expected of me there? His hands tightened on the reins momentarily. Nothing you don't freely choose to give. She barked out a laugh, harsh and disbelieving. You spent $300 for my debt. Men always expect something in return for such investments. Daniel turned to look at her directly for the first time since leaving town, his eyes the color of a summer storm. I don't consider helping someone an investment, Miss Osborne. You know my name. The sheriff had your papers. He returned his attention to the road. I also know you're a schoolteacher from Massachusetts who was robbed on her way to San Francisco, and I know that what happened to you in Knight's Ferry was wrong. Amelia fell silent, unsure how to respond to this unexpected knowledge. They crested the ridge, and a small valley opened before them. Nestled among sheltering trees sat a modest homestead. A solidly built cabin with a covered porch, a large barn, several smaller outbuildings, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed in the distance. It wasn't grand, but everything from the straight fence lines to the well-maintained roof spoke of care and attention. A tendril of smoke curled from the stone chimney, suggesting someone was home. My sister lives with me, Daniel explained, noting her wary expression. Rebecca. She helps run the place. Relief flooded through Amelia, quickly followed by embarrassment at her assumptions. Daniel guided the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin, and before they could dismount, the door swung open. A young woman with the same storm-gray eyes as Daniel appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. Her hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her expression shifted from welcoming to shocked as she took in Amelia's appearance. Daniel Jameson, she called out, planting her hands on her hips. What have you done now? Daniel helped Amelia down from the wagon with gentle hands. Rebecca, this is Miss Amelia Osborne. She'll be staying with us for a while. Rebecca hurried down the steps, her eyes taking in Amelia's disheveled state, the marks on her wrists and her brother's coat draped around her shoulders. Understanding dawned in her expression. Knight's Ferry? She asked quietly. Daniel nodded, Rebecca's mouth set in a grim line. Those bastards. Come inside, Miss Osborne. You look like you could use a hot meal and a bath. Too exhausted to argue, Amelia allowed herself to be led into the cabin. The interior was simple but comfortable, with handcrafted furniture and colorful quilts adding warmth to the practical space. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the smell of stew simmering on the cast iron stove made Amelia's stomach growl embarrassingly loud. When's the last time you ate properly? Rebecca asked, guiding her to a chair at the wooden table. I'm not certain, Amelia admitted. The days had blurred together since her capture. Rebecca exchanged a look with her brother who had followed them inside. Without a word, she ladled a generous portion of stew into a bowl and set it before Amelia with a chunk of fresh bread. Eat, she instructed. I'll heat water for a bath. As Rebecca busied herself with preparations, Daniel remained by the door, his hat in his hands. I need to see to the horses and evening chores, he said. You're safe here, Miss Osborne. Amelia nodded, too focused on restraining herself from wolfing down the food to respond properly. As the door closed behind him, she allowed herself to relax slightly, the first real food in days bringing tears to her eyes. Rebecca worked efficiently, heating water and carrying it to a copper tub in a small room off the main living area. She disappeared briefly upstairs and returned with clean clothing. These might be a bit large, but they're clean, she said, placing a simple cotton dress, undergarments, and stockings on a chair. They were mine before I lost weight last winter with the influenza. Thank you, Amelia said, genuinely moved by the woman's matter-of-fact kindness. Your brother. Why would he pay such a sum for a stranger? Rebecca paused in her work. Daniel has his reasons. He's a good man, Miss Osborne, better than most. She gestured toward the bath. Take your time. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything. Alone for the first time in weeks, Amelia allowed herself the luxury of tears as she sank into the warm water. She scrubbed away the grime of captivity, wincing at the bruises and raw skin from the shackles. By the time she emerged and dressed in Rebecca's borrowed clothes, she felt almost human again. Rebecca had laid out blankets and a pillow on a small bed in what appeared to be a sewing room. You can sleep here tonight, she explained. Tomorrow we can figure out more permanent arrangements. I don't understand any of this, Amelia admitted. Why would you both help me? Rebecca's expression softened. Get some rest, Miss Osborne. Tomorrow will come soon enough with all its explanations. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Amelia as she lay in the unfamiliar bed. Through the window, she could see the stars scattered across the vast California sky, so different from the close horizon of Boston. Eventually, the sound of quiet voices drifted from the main room. Daniel had returned from his chores and was speaking with Rebecca in low tones. Curiosity overcame propriety, and Amelia crept to the door, cracking it just enough to hear their conversation. Couldn't just leave her there, Daniel was saying. You should have seen it, Becca, like they were selling livestock. I know, Rebecca sighed, but $300. That's most of what we set aside for the new breeding stock. We'll manage. Jenkins will give us fair terms if we need credit. That's not my concern, and you know it. A chair creaked as Rebecca shifted. What happens when she's recovered? She's educated, city-bred. She won't stay here. I don't expect her to, Daniel replied, his voice firm. I'll help her get to San Francisco or wherever she wants to go. I just couldn't, he broke off. Couldn't watch another person be treated that way, Rebecca finished for him. I know, Danny, I know. Amelia closed the door silently and returned to her bed, her mind whirling with this new information. Daniel Jameson had spent money he could ill afford, not as an investment in domestic help or with unsavory intentions, but simply because he couldn't bear to see injustice done. Sleep finally claimed her, and for the first time in weeks, no nightmares disturbed her rest. The morning brought the unfamiliar sounds of a working ranch roosters crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, the rhythmic chopping of wood. Amelia dressed quickly and ventured into the main room to find Rebecca kneading dough at the table. Good morning, Rebecca greeted her. There's coffee on the stove if you'd like some. Daniel's out doing morning chores, but he'll be in for breakfast soon. Thank you, Amelia said, pouring herself a cup of the strong brew. May I help with anything? Rebecca looked surprised but nodded. You could slice those apples for frying if you don't mind. They worked together in companionable silence, and by the time Daniel entered, stamping dust from his boots at the door, a hearty breakfast awaited. He paused when he saw Amelia, as if startled to find her still there. Miss Osborne, he acknowledged with a slight nod. Did you rest well? Better than I have in some time, she replied honestly. Thank you. Breakfast was a simple but satisfying affair of fried salt pork, apples, and fresh bread. Daniel ate quickly, his movements efficient, a man accustomed to making the most of limited time. When he finished, he pushed back his chair and looked directly at Amelia. We need to talk about what happens next, he said. I imagine you still want to reach San Francisco. Amelia set down her fork. I'm not certain what options remain to me now. The teaching position will surely have been filled in my absence. Perhaps, Daniel acknowledged, but a woman with your education won't lack for opportunities in a growing city like San Francisco. The practical matter, Rebecca interjected, is that the stagecoach only comes through Knight's Ferry once a week. The next one won't arrive until Saturday. That's 4 days from now, Daniel added. You're welcome to stay here until then. After that, I can purchase you a ticket to San Francisco. Amelia stared at him, bewildered by his generosity. Mr. Jameson, you've already spent a small fortune on my behalf. I cannot allow you to. It's not a matter of allowing, Miss Osborne, he interrupted gently. It's simply what's right. At least let me work while I'm here, she insisted. I won't be a burden. A silent communication passed between the siblings before Rebecca smiled. Actually, there is something you might help with. The children from neighboring farms gather here 3 times a week for lessons. Our last teacher moved back east in the spring, and I've been doing my best, but you're a school teacher, Daniel finished. Even a few days of proper instruction would be a gift to these children. For the first time since her ordeal began, Amelia felt a spark of purpose. I would be happy to help. When do they arrive? Tomorrow morning, Rebecca said. 8 children ages 6 to 14. We use the front room as a classroom. After breakfast, Daniel returned to his work and Rebecca showed Amelia around the ranch. The Jameson property was modest, but well-maintained, about 80 acres of workable land with 50 head of cattle, a small orchard, a vegetable garden, and enough pasture to support several horses. The entire operation, Rebecca explained, was run by Daniel with occasional help from a neighboring farmer's sons during busy seasons. It wasn't always just the two of us, Rebecca said as they walked back toward the house. Our parents built this place 20 years ago when Daniel was 12 and I was 8. Father died in a mining accident when I was 15, and Mother followed 3 winters ago. I'm sorry, Amelia said softly. Rebecca shrugged, but the gesture couldn't hide the sadness in her eyes. Life out here isn't easy, but it's ours. Daniel could have sold the ranch after Mother died, had offers too, but he's stubborn, says this land is our legacy. As they approached the cabin, Amelia noticed Daniel by the corral, working with a young horse. His movements were patient and deliberate as he led the nervous animal in circles, occasionally stopping to stroke its neck and murmur words too distant to hear. He has a way with troubled creatures, Rebecca observed, following Amelia's gaze. That mare was half wild when he brought her home last month. Now look at her. Indeed, the horse was responding to Daniel's gentle guidance, its initial resistance giving way to cautious trust. The parallel to her own situation wasn't lost on Amelia. Your brother is an unusual man, she remarked. Rebecca smiled knowingly. More than you realize. That evening after supper, Daniel brought out a well-worn chessboard. Rebecca mentioned you enjoy chess, Miss Osborne. Amelia raised an eyebrow at Rebecca, who merely smiled innocently. I may have noticed the notation book in your bag when I was gathering your things for washing. I do play, though I'm afraid I'm out of practice, Amelia admitted. Daniel set up the pieces with practiced ease. It's been some time since I've had a worthy opponent. Rebecca claims the game is too slow for her tastes. Life is too short to spend hours staring at carved pieces, Rebecca declared, picking up her mending. Some of us prefer more productive pastimes. The gentle teasing between the siblings created a comfortable atmosphere that eased Amelia's lingering wariness. As they played, she discovered that Daniel Jameson was not only educated, but possessed a sharp strategic mind that challenged her own. Their conversation flowed naturally from the game to literature, from farming techniques to philosophy. Where did you study, Mr. Jameson? She asked after he quoted Shakespeare while capturing her knight. A shadow crossed his face. I didn't formally. Our father believed in education, kept a good library. After he died, I continued on my own. Daniel's being modest, Rebecca interjected. He was accepted to Yale but stayed to run the ranch after father's accident. Daniel shot his sister a look of mild reproach. Ancient history, Becca. It's remarkable that you've educated yourself so thoroughly, Amelia said, genuinely impressed. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Books are good company on winter nights. Your move, I believe. They played until the lamps needed refilling, with Amelia eventually checkmating Daniel's king in a closely fought endgame. His defeat seemed to please rather than disappoint him. Well played, Miss Osborne, he said, smiling fully for the first time since she'd met him. The expression transformed his serious face, crinkling the corners of his eyes and revealing a dimple in his right cheek. Amelia felt an unexpected flutter in her chest and quickly looked away, busying herself with resetting the chess pieces. Thank you for the game, Mr. Jameson. That night, as Amelia prepared for bed, she found herself conflicted. The Jamesons' kindness and the peace of the ranch were seductive after weeks of fear and mistreatment. Yet San Francisco represented the independent life she had planned for herself, the reason she had made the dangerous journey west. 4 days, she reminded herself. 4 days of safety, then back to her original path. Morning brought a flurry of activity as Rebecca prepared the front room for school. 8 children arrived with their parents, all clearly curious about the new teacher. Amelia was introduced as Miss Osborne from Boston, with no mention of how she came to be at the Jameson ranch. Teaching proved to be the perfect distraction from her troubles. The children were eager to learn, if somewhat behind in their studies compared to their Eastern counterparts. Amelia quickly organized them by ability rather than age, creating lessons that challenged the advanced students while providing fundamental instruction to those who needed it. Daniel appeared briefly at midday, bringing fresh water and staying to listen as Amelia led the older children in analyzing a passage from the Odyssey. She was aware of his presence by the door, his attention focused on her words as she explained the concept of heroic journeys and homecomings. When their eyes met briefly, he nodded in appreciation before silently withdrawing. When the children departed at 3 o'clock, Amelia felt more herself than she had in weeks. Rebecca brought her tea as she organized notes for the next day's lessons. "You have a gift," Rebecca observed. The children were captivated. "Teaching brings me joy," Amelia admitted. "I've missed it." Rebecca hesitated, then asked the question Amelia had been expecting. "What happened, if you don't mind my asking? How did you end up at that auction?" Amelia stared into her teacup, marshaling the courage to recount her ordeal. "I left Boston after my father died. There was nothing left for me there, no family, and the school where I taught was reducing staff. I secured a position at a ladies' academy in San Francisco through correspondence and spent nearly all my savings on the train ticket to St. Louis and the stagecoach fare beyond." She took a deep breath. "The coach was attacked 2 days out from Knight's Ferry. The robbers took everything, my money, my letters of introduction, even my father's watch. The driver was killed and I was the only passenger." Her voice faltered. "I walked to town, arriving with nothing but the clothes on my back. The sheriff seemed sympathetic at first, offered me lodging while I sent telegrams to San Francisco." Rebecca's expression darkened. "Let me guess. Sheriff Holcomb and Mayor Preston decided you owed the town for your room and board." Amelia nodded. "They claimed my telegrams were never answered, that the school denied knowing me. I have no way to verify if they actually sent them. After a week, they presented me with a bill I couldn't possibly pay and declared me a debtor to be sold into servitude to cover the costs." "It's an old scheme," Rebecca said bitterly. "They've done it before, usually to travelers without connections who won't be missed. The mayor owns the hotel and his brother runs the telegraph office." "How is such a thing possible in 1872? Amelia asked, anger replacing the shame she'd carried. "Slavery was abolished years ago. They call it debt servitude and claim it's legal under California statutes for vagrancy. It's not, of course. Daniel checked with a proper judge in Modesto last year, but Knight's Ferry is remote enough that they get away with it." The front door opened and Daniel entered, his expression grim as he caught the tail end of their conversation. "Not for much longer," he said. "The circuit judge is coming through next month and I've been gathering evidence." Amelia looked up at him in surprise. "Is that why you were in Knight's Ferry, to gather evidence?" He nodded, removing his hat and hanging it by the door. "I try to be there whenever they hold one of their auctions, document who gets sold, who does the buying, keep track of what happens to the people." His jaw tightened. "I've helped a few escape over the past year, sent them on to Sacramento or San Francisco with enough money to start over." "You could be arrested," Amelia pointed out. "What you're doing is dangerous, foolish, and exactly like him," Rebecca finished with a mix of exasperation and pride. "I've told him the same thing countless times," Daniel shrugged. "Some things are worth the risk." He met Amelia's gaze steadily. "I couldn't save everyone, but I could save you." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, charged with meaning Amelia wasn't prepared to examine. She looked away first, returning to her lesson plans with trembling hands. That evening, after Rebecca had retired, Daniel found Amelia on the porch, wrapped in a borrowed shawl and staring at the stars. He settled into the chair beside her, respecting her space while offering company. I never thanked you properly, she said after a comfortable silence. For what you did, no thanks needed. Nevertheless, you have my gratitude. She turned to study his profile in the moonlight. Rebecca told me you've been fighting this injustice for some time. He nodded, his eyes on the distant hills. My father believed in standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. Seems I inherited that along with his stubbornness. It's more than stubbornness, Mr. Jameson. It's courage. His mouth quirked in that half-smile that was becoming familiar. Daniel, please, after all you've beaten me at chess, that earns first-name privileges in this house. She smiled despite herself. Very well, Daniel, then you must call me Amelia. Amelia, he repeated, and her name in his voice sounded like something precious. They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their lives, his childhood on the ranch, her years teaching in Boston. Daniel spoke of his dreams for the ranch, plans to expand the orchards and improve his breeding stock. Amelia confided her disappointment when her father's death left her with little choice but to seek employment far from home. I've always wanted to see the Pacific Ocean, she admitted. Even as a little girl, I dreamed of standing on the western shore, knowing there was nothing between me and the far side of the world but water. San Francisco Bay is beautiful, Daniel said. The way the fog rolls in at dawn, turning everything to pearl and silver. At her questioning look, he added, I traveled there twice to sell cattle. The city wasn't to my taste, too crowded, too hurried, but the bay took my breath away. You prefer open spaces. I prefer honest places, he corrected gently. Cities hide too much beneath their fine facades. As the night deepened and the conversation waned, Amelia found herself reluctant to end their time together. There was an ease between them that defied their short acquaintance, as if they'd known each other far longer. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern. Amelia taught the children in the mornings and early afternoons, then helped Rebecca with household tasks. Daniel would appear periodically between ranch chores, sometimes joining the lessons, other times simply watching from a distance with an expression Amelia couldn't quite decipher. In the evenings, they would gather around the fire, Rebecca with her needlework, Daniel repairing tack or reading, Amelia preparing lessons or writing in her journal. Conversations flowed naturally, punctuated by comfortable silences. After Rebecca retired, Daniel and Amelia would often continue talking, their discussions ranging from lighthearted to profound. On the third night, as they sat on the porch watching heat lightning play across distant clouds, Daniel asked the question she'd been dreading. Have you decided? About San Francisco, Amelia folded her hands in her lap, uncertain how to answer. The truth was, she hadn't thought about San Francisco all day. The stagecoach comes tomorrow, she said instead of answering directly. Daniel nodded, accepting her evasion. I've arranged your ticket. The coach leaves at noon. Thank you. The words felt inadequate. He turned to look at her, his face half shadowed in the lantern light. Amelia, I want you to know that you have choices. Whatever you decide tomorrow, it should be because it's what you want, not what you feel obligated to do. I don't understand. His hands, always so steady, betrayed a slight tremor as he leaned forward. I'm saying you could stay here if you wanted to. Amelia's breath caught. As what, Daniel, your servant? You're as yourself, he interrupted gently. As our teacher, the children adore you. Their parents have already approached me about making a permanent arrangement. Oh, relief mingled with an unexpected disappointment. You're offering me employment, something flashed in his eyes. For now, I'm offering you time, Amelia. Time to heal, to decide what you truly want without pressure or fear driving your choices. She understood then what he wasn't saying, that this was not merely about a teaching position. There was more between them, something neither was ready to name but both felt growing with each passing day. I need to think, she said softly. Of course. He stood, giving her space. Whatever you decide, the choice is yours, truly yours. Sleep eluded Amelia that night as she weighed her options. San Francisco represented the independent life she had planned, a fresh start in a thriving city where her skills would be valued. Yet the thought of leaving Knight's Ferry, leaving Daniel and Rebecca, created an ache in her chest that couldn't be easily dismissed. By morning, she still hadn't reached a decision. She taught her final lesson with extra care, making notes for whoever might continue the children's education. When the last child had departed with a tearful hug, Amelia returned to her room to pack her few belongings, the clothes Rebecca had given her, the small journal Daniel had found for her use. Rebecca knocked softly at the door. "The stage coach will be here in an hour," she said, her expression carefully neutral. "Daniel's gone to town to meet it." Amelia nodded, unable to find words. "He won't ask you to stay," Rebecca continued. "He's too honorable to pressure you, but I'm not." She stepped into the room, taking Amelia's hands in hers. "Stay, Amelia, not just for the children or for Daniel, though God knows I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, but for yourself. You belong here more than you realize." Tears filled Amelia's eyes. "I hardly know him. I hardly know myself anymore after everything that's happened." "Then take the time to find out," Rebecca urged. "The city will still be there if you change your mind." The sound of wagon wheels on the drive interrupted their conversation. Daniel had returned earlier than expected. Rebecca squeezed Amelia's hands once more before leaving her alone with her thoughts. Amelia approached the window, watching as Daniel unhitched the wagon. His movements were methodical but tinged with a heaviness she hadn't seen before. He paused, looking up at the house, and for a moment their eyes met through the glass. He nodded once, acknowledging her presence, then continued with his task. In that moment, clarity washed over Amelia. The decision, which had seemed so complex, suddenly simplified into perfect certainty. She left her half-packed bag on the bed and hurried downstairs and out onto the porch. Daniel looked up in surprise as she approached, her steps purposeful. "Amelia, the coach won't be here for another hour." She stopped before him, heart pounding but voice steady. "I'm not taking the coach, Daniel." Hope flickered across his face, quickly tempered with caution. "You're staying to teach." "I'm staying," she confirmed. "For the teaching, yes, for the chance to know my own mind without fear driving my choices." And she took a deep breath. "I'm staying because of you. Because in 4 days, you've shown me more kindness and respect than most men would in a lifetime." Daniel's expression softened, the caution giving way to something warmer. "Are you certain? I don't want you to feel." Amelia silenced him by placing her hand on his arm. "I've never been more certain of anything." His smile began slowly, then bloomed into the full expression that transformed his entire face. Tentatively, he covered her hand with his own. "Then welcome home, Amelia Osborne." The following weeks brought a gentle evolution in their relationship. Daniel courted Amelia with old-fashioned propriety, mindful of her recent trauma and determined to give her the respect she deserved. Their evening conversations continued, but now included walks along the creek that bordered the property and Sunday drives to neighboring farms. Amelia flourished in her role as teacher, expanding the school days to include more children from outlying homesteads. With Rebecca's encouragement, she began using her afternoons to learn about ranch life, gardening, preserving food, even helping with the gentler livestock. 1 month after deciding to stay, Amelia accompanied Daniel to Modesto, where she gave her testimony to the circuit judge about the illegal practices in Knight's Ferry. Her statement, combined with Daniel's meticulous documentation and the testimony of 2 other rescued debtors, was enough to warrant official investigation. "You were magnificent," Daniel told her as they drove home, his admiration evident. "The judge was convinced before you finished speaking." "It feels good to fight back," Amelia admitted. "To know others might be spared what happened to me." "Justice is slow," he cautioned, "but it will come. The telegrams to the governor have already been sent." As summer gave way to autumn, the ranch burst into activity with harvest preparations. Amelia found herself fully integrated into the rhythm of the place, her days divided between teaching and helping with the countless tasks that sustained the Jameson household. On a crisp October evening, Daniel took her to his favorite spot on the property, a small rise overlooking the valley, where the sunset painted the landscape in golds and crimsons. They sat together on a fallen log, shoulders touching, watching the light fade from the sky. "I received a letter today," Daniel said after a comfortable silence. "From Judge Wilson in Modesto." Amelia turned to him, suddenly alert. "About Knight's Ferry," he nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Sheriff Holcomb and Mayor Preston have been removed from office pending trial. The state has appointed an interim administration until proper elections can be held. Relief and satisfaction flooded through her. It's really over then. It is. He took her hand, his touch warm against the cooling air. Which means you're truly free now, Amelia. Your name is cleared. You could go to San Francisco or anywhere else you choose. She studied their intertwined fingers. Are you trying to get rid of me, Daniel Jameson? Never. His voice dropped to a near whisper. But I need you to know that you're staying because you want to, not because circumstances forced your hand. Amelia shifted to face him fully. I'm exactly where I want to be. Their first kiss was gentle, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something more profound. When they finally parted, breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. I think I've loved you since I saw you standing on that auction block, refusing to be broken by what they'd done to you. Tears pricked at Amelia's eyes. And I love you. For seeing me as a person when everyone else saw property. For giving me choices when others took them away. They walked back to the house hand in hand, the future stretching before them like the star-filled sky overhead, vast and bright with possibility. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, they rode to the small church in the neighboring town of Oakdale. Rebecca accompanied them, her face alight with barely contained excitement. The church was filled with familiar faces, students and their families, neighboring farmers and friends from surrounding communities. Daniel had asked her to marry him the previous evening, presenting her with a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. The proposal was heartfelt rather than elaborate, offered as they sat by the fire after Rebecca had retired. I don't have much to give you, he'd said, his usual confidence giving way to endearing nervousness. Just this land, this home, and every day of my life from now until the end. Amelia's answer was immediate and certain. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, the pastor's words echoing in the small wooden church as they promised to love and honor each other through whatever life might bring. When Daniel kissed her as his wife for the first time, Amelia felt the last shadows of her ordeal finally lift away. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the oak trees and food contributed by everyone in attendance. As the sun began to set, neighbors took their leave, until only the closest friends remained around the bonfire Daniel had built. Rebecca presented them with a wedding gift, a handmade quilt she'd been secretly working on for weeks, its pattern incorporating elements from both their lives. Books and apples for the teacher, stars and horses for the rancher. For your new beginning, she said, embracing them both. Later, she quietly informed them that she would be staying with a friend in town for a few days, giving the newlyweds privacy in their home. That night, alone in what was now their bedroom, Amelia and Daniel discovered each other with tender patience. His touch was gentle, attentive to her responses, his whispered words of love creating a sanctuary of trust between them. For Amelia, the physical expression of their bond healed something deep within her soul, replacing memories of violation and captivity with those of reverence and joy. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Daniel traced the contours of her face with his fingertips, as if memorizing her by touch. Happy, he asked softly. Amelia kissed his palm. Complete. Life settled into new patterns as autumn deepened into winter. The school continued to thrive under Amelia's guidance, and she found unexpected fulfillment in the rhythm of ranch life. Rebecca, though initially concerned about being a third wheel in the newlyweds' household, discovered that marriage had only expanded their family circle rather than constricting it. December brought the news that Sheriff Holcomb and Mayor Preston had been convicted of multiple charges, including unlawful imprisonment and fraud. They would serve 5 years in the state penitentiary, and their assets were seized to compensate their victims. Justice at last, Daniel remarked as he read the letter from Judge Wilson aloud during supper, though no punishment seems adequate for what they did. The true victory is that it can never happen again, Amelia pointed out, not in Knight's Ferry at least. The first Christmas of their marriage was a joyous affair, with the house decorated with evergreen boughs and handmade ornaments. Daniel surprised Amelia with a collection of books she had mentioned missing from her father's library. While she presented him with a finely crafted saddle she had secretly commissioned from the local leather worker. Winter passed in a blur of cozy evenings by the fire, occasional fierce storms that tested the ranch's preparations, and quiet moments of deepening intimacy between husband and wife. By February, Amelia had news of her own to share. She chose a quiet evening when Rebecca was visiting friends in town. After dinner, as they sat before the hearth playing chess, a continuing tradition, Amelia moved her queen to an unexpected position. Daniel studied the board with a slight frown. "Interesting strategy. What are you planning?" "Something long-term," she replied with a smile. "Very long-term, in fact." His eyes lifted to meet hers, puzzled by her tone. "I visited Dr. Morgan in Oakdale yesterday," she continued. "He confirmed what I've suspected for a few weeks now." Understanding dawned in Daniel's expression, followed swiftly by wonder. "Amelia, are you saying?" She nodded, joy bubbling up inside her. "We're going to have a child, Daniel, in late August, according to the doctor." The chessboard was nearly upset as Daniel moved to kneel beside her chair, his hands gently cradling her face. "A child," he repeated, voice thick with emotion. "Our child. Are you pleased?" His answer was a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "More than I can possibly express." The news of Amelia's pregnancy brought out a protective streak in Daniel that both touched and occasionally amused her. He insisted on hiring one of the neighbor's sons to help with the heavier ranch work, freeing him to take on tasks that previously fell to Amelia or Rebecca. Despite her protests that she wasn't an invalid, Amelia found herself deeply moved by his concern. Rebecca was ecstatic about becoming an aunt, immediately beginning work on baby clothes and reorganizing the small bedroom adjacent to theirs for the new arrival. The students were equally excited, especially the younger ones who bombarded Amelia with questions about the baby that sometimes left her blushing. Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers across the valley and new life on the ranch, calves in the pastures, chicks in the henhouse, and tender shoots in the garden. Amelia continued teaching, though she agreed to reduce her hours as summer approached and her condition became more pronounced. On a warm June evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the grass, Daniel placed his hand on the swell of Amelia's abdomen, marveling at the strong kicks from within. "He's going to be a horseman," Daniel declared after a particularly vigorous movement. "Feel that strength." "Or she might be a dancer," Amelia countered, covering his hand with her own. "Either way, this child will grow up knowing only love and freedom." Daniel's expression sobered. "I think about that day and nights very often," he admitted. "How close I came to not being there, to missing the auction entirely because the fence repair took longer than expected." "But you were there," Amelia reminded him, "at exactly the right moment." "Providence," he murmured, kissing her temple. "It had to be." As July's heat settled over the valley, Amelia found herself increasingly uncomfortable but determined to remain active. She continued to help with lighter household chores and spent hours in the shade of the oak trees, reading to the neighbor children who still came by despite the official end of the school term. Daniel expanded the porch on the north side of the house, creating a cool retreat where Amelia could rest during the hottest part of the day. It was there that she was sitting, fanning herself listlessly, when the letter arrived that would bring the final chapter of her journey full circle. The envelope bore the seal of the San Francisco Ladies' Academy, the school that had originally hired her, then supposedly denied knowing her when the Knights Ferry officials sent their telegrams. With trembling fingers, Amelia broke the seal and unfolded the letter within. "Dear Miss Osborne," it began, using her maiden name. "It has recently come to our attention through correspondence with the Circuit Court in Stanislaus County that you were the victim of grievous fraud and imprisonment while en route to take up your position at our institution last year. We wish to clarify that we received no telegrams regarding your delay, nor did we ever deny your appointment. Indeed, we waited with concern for several weeks, sending inquiries to the stage company that went unanswered. When we finally received word that the coach had been attacked and the passengers presumed lost, we mourned what we believed was your tragic fate. To discover that you were instead held against your will and sold into illegal servitude is shocking beyond words. Please accept our sincerest apologies for not investigating more thoroughly. The position for which you were hired was eventually filled, but we would be honored to offer you a place on our faculty should you ever wish to claim it. The enclosed bank draft represents the salary you would have earned during your first term with us, which we feel morally obligated to provide despite your absence through no fault of your own. Amelia stared at the bank draft, a sum substantial enough to take her breath away, then continued reading. We understand from Judge Wilson's letter that you have established a life in Stanislaus County and may no longer desire to relocate to San Francisco. Whatever your decision, please know that our door remains open to you and we stand ready to assist in any way possible. With deepest regrets and sincere admiration for your courage, Matilda Whitmore, headmistress. Daniel found her still holding the letter, tears streaming down her face. Instantly alarmed, he rushed to her side. "Amelia, what's wrong? Is it the baby?" She shook her head, wordlessly handing him the letter. As he read, his expression shifted from concern to understanding to quiet pride. "They are offering you the position," he said when he finished, "the one you traveled west for." "They are." Daniel sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "Do you want it?" The question was asked without fear or jealousy, only sincere desire to know her heart. It was this, more than anything, that confirmed the rightness of her path. "No," Amelia said with absolute certainty. "That life, the one I planned in San Francisco, belonged to a different woman, a woman who hadn't yet found her true home." She placed his hand on her rounded abdomen. "My place is here, with you and our child, with Rebecca and our students. This is where I'm meant to be." The relief in Daniel's eyes was quickly masked, but not before she caught it. "The money would be useful," he pointed out practically. "For the baby, for the ranch." "Yes," she agreed, "and perhaps we could use some of it to build a proper schoolhouse on the property. The front room is becoming too small for all the students who want to attend." His smile was answer enough. August arrived with relentless heat and increasing anticipation. Dr. Morgan from Oakdale began making weekly visits to the ranch, pleased with Amelia's health, but cautioning that first babies often arrived on their own schedules. Rebecca organized the women from neighboring farms to help prepare for the birth, ensuring that everything would be ready whenever the time came. The baby, however, seemed determined to make a dramatic entrance. Amelia's labor began during one of the worst thunderstorms of the season, with rain falling in sheets and the road to town quickly becoming impassable. Daniel rode out himself to fetch the doctor, leaving Rebecca to comfort and assist Amelia through the early stages. By the time Daniel returned with Dr. Morgan, soaked to the skin and mud-spattered, Amelia's labor had progressed rapidly. The doctor barely had time to wash his hands before announcing that the baby was ready to make its appearance. After an intense but mercifully brief final stage, their son was born just as the storm began to abate, a robust boy with a shock of dark hair and lungs powerful enough to make his displeasure at entering the world abundantly clear. "He's perfect," Daniel whispered, his voice unsteady as he gazed at the tiny face. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas William Jameson, Thomas for Amelia's father, William for Daniel's. From his first days, it was clear he had inherited his mother's determination and his father's calm strength. He thrived in the loving environment of the ranch, surrounded by family and frequent visitors from the growing community that centered around Amelia's school. With the funds from the Ladies' Academy, they built a proper schoolhouse on the edge of the property, large enough to accommodate 20 students comfortably. The dedication ceremony in October drew people from as far as Modesto, including Judge Wilson, who had become a friend and supporter of their educational efforts. As autumn painted the valley in russet and gold once more, Amelia stood on the porch with her son in her arms, watching Daniel mend a fence in the distance. 1 year had passed since he had said those life-changing words at the auction block. "Untie her, she's coming home with me now." In that moment, she had seen him only as a stranger, perhaps a different kind of captor. Now she saw the man who had become her partner, her lover, her champion, and the father of her child. A man who had risked everything to do what was right, then given her the freedom to choose her own path, never suspecting that path would lead directly back to him. Rebecca joined her on the porch, smiling at the sleeping baby. "Penny, for your thoughts." "I was thinking about chains," Amelia replied, "and how sometimes what appears to be captivity can actually be the first step toward freedom." "Deep thoughts for such a beautiful day," Rebecca observed. Amelia smiled, watching as Daniel looked up and waved to them. "Not so deep, just grateful." As winter approached, bringing with it Thomas's first Christmas and the promise of many seasons to come, Amelia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this place. The road had been difficult, marked by fear and injustice, but it had led to a joy she could never have imagined when she first set out from Boston. In the years that followed, the Jameson ranch flourished, as did the school that bore Amelia's name. Two more children joined the family, a daughter, Sarah Rebecca, born 2 years after Thomas, and another son, James Daniel, who arrived 3 years later. Each child brought new dimensions of love and purpose to their lives, reinforcing the bonds that had begun in that dusty auction square in Knight's Ferry. The schoolhouse became the heart of the community, hosting not only classes but social gatherings, civic meetings, and even the occasional traveling theater troupe. Amelia's reputation as an educator spread throughout the region, bringing students from increasingly distant farms and even occasional visitors from San Francisco seeking advice on rural education. Daniel continued to expand and improve the ranch, implementing progressive farming techniques and breeding practices that gradually transformed the modest homestead into one of the most respected properties in the county. He never lost his commitment to justice, serving for many years on the county commission and working to ensure that the abuses of the past could not be repeated. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the day's work complete, Daniel and Amelia would often sit on the porch together, hands intertwined, watching the stars emerge above the valley they both loved, free, at peace, and eternally grateful for the chain of events that had brought them together. In the autumn of 1892, 20 years after their first meeting, they hosted a celebration at the ranch, part harvest festival, part anniversary observance. Friends old and new gathered to share food and music, stories and laughter. Thomas, now a tall young man studying law in Sacramento, returned for the occasion along with Sarah, who was following in her mother's footsteps as a teacher, and James, who worked alongside his father on the ranch. As the festivities wound down and guests began to depart, Daniel led Amelia to their special spot on the ridge overlooking the valley. The sunset painted the sky in familiar golds and crimsons, just as it had on the evening he had first confessed his love. 20 years, he marveled, his hair now streaked with silver, but his eyes still that same storm gray that had first captured her attention. "Sometimes it seems like only yesterday I saw you standing on that auction block." "And sometimes," Amelia replied, leaning into his embrace, "it seems like I've always been here, always been yours." Daniel kissed her temple, his arms secure around her waist. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you'd taken that stagecoach to San Francisco?" Amelia shook her head, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "No, because even then I knew this was where I belonged, where I was meant to be free." As they walked back to their home, the home they had built together through love and determination, Amelia reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From chains to choice, from captivity to freedom, from stranger to beloved. It was a story she would pass down to her children and grandchildren, a testament to the power of courage, justice, and love. For in the end, true freedom wasn't found in the absence of chains, but in the presence of love that respected choice. And true love wasn't about possession, but about the courage to say, in both word and deed, "Untie her, she's coming home with me now."